Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 60, A Conclave of RPG Historians, with Jon Peterson and Shannon Appelcline.
Greetings one and all. We are today in the presence again of digital greatness. Today we are fortunate to have with us Shannon Appelcline, author of the magisterial This is Free Trader Beowulf, which is a history of the Traveler role-playing game. He's probably most famous for Designers and Dragons, which is his multi-volume history of seemingly every role-playing game company that ever put up a shingle and slammed some dice on a table. It was a book that got me through the pandemic. Shannon seems to finish books at the pace other people finish video games. So, Shannon, welcome. Hello. Good to see you.
Thank you. Appreciate coming back and appreciate being here among historians.
Second in order, but by no means in importance, we have Jon Peterson. As I will keep repeating until I see it in Google's Ngram viewer, Jon Peterson is the Thucydides of D&D history. His Playing at the World and Game Wizards are both required reading if you're going to post about D&D history anywhere online. How many New York Times best-selling books do you have? Two, three?
Hmm. Maybe one. I don't know.
Maybe is it Art and Arcana?
Probably Heroes Feast. Heroes Feast, I think.
Really? That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Um, but would you recommend Art and Arcana as the entry point for Jon Peterson, or would you go Game Wizards or Playing at the World, you think?
Well, when you say entry point for Jon Peterson, if it's your entry point to D&D, I think Art and Arcana might be a good choice. It's really a kind of breezy coffee table book, covers history at least up to whatever, 7 years ago now, in a way that I think gets across a lot of the flavor of what it was like to be there in the era. And that's kind of what's so cool about doing it as a visual history, is you actually get to do it primarily in pictures. You get to show people this is what the game would have looked like when you saw it in 1980 and, a bookstore that you walked into then. Um, but I mean, yeah, I certainly would not recommend Playing at the World as your first step into the Petersoniverse. If you're really interested in war games, though, that's probably a place to start if you don't go to some of the anthologies and things like that, like Zones of Control. I've written a lot of like short pieces. It is possible to find those. You find them in academic anthologies primarily, but yeah, playing at the World's a bit longer than it was even initially when I did it.
But now it's in two volumes.
Now it's in two volumes, a digestible volume and an indigestible volume. Um, but I mean, if you like role-playing games, Elusive Shift isn't a bad place to start. It's kind of like, up to 1980, a pretty good account of like what the design choices were that went into making role-playing this phenomenon and industry and everything people like Shannon write about.
Well, in my mind, you're both titans of the field. Um, and it blew my mind that you guys have only had one brief encounter in meat space, and apparently it was totally coincidental in a role-playing game store in Berkeley.
It wasn't coincidental. Now, this is when Art and Arcana had just come out. So it was 2018, probably. And like it was at Games of Berkeley, which, by the way, I lived in Berkeley for 10 years, for like, roughly 2000, 2010. I remember Games of Berkeley being in a completely different space than it was when we met that time, Shannon, briefly. My recollection is we were there, I was there with Arrow Lotus and, a bunch of other people. We were doing like a talk about Art and Arcana and a signing, and we heard that you were coming. And we like waited and waited and waited. We waited around that store for at least 90 minutes. And then we like had to go. Like, yeah, there was some we needed to go, I think, to Lucasfilm in town. And like, we in the very last minute, like as we were going out the door, there is Shannon. We're like, Shannon, great to see you, man. We gotta go. Good luck. That is my recollection. Is that roughly what you remember? Or?
That sounds about right, though. I didn't know about the waiting around for 90 minutes. I also had no idea that you'd lived in Berkeley for 10 years because I lived in Berkeley for about 30 years, including the 10 you were there. And so shocking we never met there before. And I remember Games of Berkeley in three different locations, including that one.
I mean, this feels like a natural segue to one of my questions, which is, are we all introverts? Like, I'm an extroverted introvert, but truth be told, I leave parties early and I go home and read. Are you guys similar in that regard?
Except for the extroverted part. I'd say I'm a relatively introverted introvert.
Yeah, I'm a pretty antisocial these days. I mean, I didn't used to be. When I was a kid, I think I was very social and had hung out a lot and did kid sorts of
Hmm.
things. But I just don't do that anymore.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. I mean, I think that's why many of us like role-playing games, because at least for me, it draws me out. It gives me a place to go and meet people on a regular schedule and to be forced to interact with them.
And are you in any game? Shannon, are you in any active games right now or no?
We've been doing an occasional microscope game online with some friends, and I've been doing a lot of board games online with friends. Those I do every week. The role-playing need to figure out some better venues here in Hawaii. The problem is I moved out here 5 years ago, and 2 months and 24 days after we moved out here, the island went on to lockdown, and that's kind of the area of time when you're setting your new patterns for somewhere, figuring out what you're going to do. And by the time we were out of lockdown a year and a half later, I was back to gaming with all my friends online from the Bay Area.
And John, you playing anything, running anything right now or no?
Nah, I might do it. I play video games. I'm playing the Claire Obscure video game, Expedition 33, when I have a spare moment.
So what's a story in tabletop role-playing game history or history more broadly that you would like to tell and just haven't had a chance to yet?
What a amazingly broad question.
Thank you.
Um, geez, that's a tough one. I mean, there's lots of things that I know I'm still working on that, I want to turn into things, some of which I published fragmentary pieces of, some of which I haven't. Certainly, I remain convinced that there is a story about live action role-playing games prior to the era of the Masquerade of, White Wolf's kind of seminal games that got people like I know both Ben and I were super into that at roughly the same time and indeed in roughly the same space. But I think in the 1980s, there was a lot of innovation that went into role-playing games through what the technology is, I guess, that doing this live action had unlocked. And a lot of things that were kind of cast as parlor LARPs. When I look at indie games today and I look at their moving pieces, I see a lot of stuff that I think is just kind of polished off or repainted that was created for the first people that really thought about, okay, let's throw a bunch of people together and have the GM go total, Deus Abscondicus and let them play with each other within the parameters that the system has defined. That, I think countless indie games today have attributes that are kind of drawn from that same initial set of innovations from the 1980s. So is that a story? I mean, it's a long one. My stories tend to be long ones, but there's definitely, I think, there's so many places there's still work to do. There's so many things we still don't know, right? All of us have spilled so much blood and treasure trying to capture as much of this history as we can, and yet here we are, we're so early on this, we're so still close to it temporally. I feel like all we get to do, that we don't have the privilege of being right. We don't have the privilege of settling anything. We're too close to this. It's too early. All we get to do is maybe articulate the major lines of investigation, right? In our lifetimes, all three of us. I think that's probably the best thing that we'll achieve.
On the other hand, we're also close enough to it that we can actually still talk to people, get their comments and stuff, and 50 or 100 years down the line, they're not going to have that advantage. But for some of my own, I've just spent the last 5 years putting together what I call the Lost Histories, which are a bunch of histories I didn't get around to the first time. And so that's, I think, helped me close that gap a little bit. I think the ones that I was the happiest to write about were some of the things from the 70s and 80s, which, new information has turned out. I finally was able to write a little bit about Warlock, 10 pages or so in the Balboa game shop and things like that in
Wait, so what
Southern
is Warlock? I
California.
don't, what is that? I don't even know.
How to play
Uh,
D&D without playing D&D, as the original
yeah,
tag in the Spartan Simulation Gaming Journal number 9, 1975, titled the game.
yeah, it was uh a in the 70s you had all these people who did what we now call variant D&D games, VD&D games. And they were just uh creating new classes, changing out the classes, putting in spell point systems, putting in, critical hit systems and that, and changing them bit by bit. And probably the one that most people knew about beforehand was Arduin, because Arduin actually got some publication, another Bay Area, uh, San Francisco Bay Area game. And so a lot of people saw it over the years, but there were a lot more of them. And one of them was Warlock, which came from Southern California. And it was, as John said, in Spartan number 9, which meant probably almost no one saw it. And it also came out in a, small edition from Balboa Game Company, which was a game shop down there. Um, and there's probably any number of small things like that we've just barely seen the edges of. But in this case, one of the authors of Warlock wrote in Alarms and Excursions, Lee Gold's excellent APA, which has spanned the entire history of the industry up until what, last month now. Um, and so there was finally, when A&E got put online by Lee Gold and her friends, made into PDFs, we could actually see some of that without having to track down the really hard to get early issues, which John is pretty great at doing. But
In
a
fact,
lot of
some
the,
of the scans that Lee has are from my copies,
yeah.
including her
Um,
number 1 or number 8. Yes, but anyway.
wow. Yeah. And so that's one of the great things I've been happy to. But I also, because I approach this from companies, I have all kinds of companies that I'm like, that one would be great to write about. I have a copy on the shelf across from me of Dragon Raid because I picked it up a few years ago thinking, maybe I could write about that and use it to talk about the whole attack on role-playing games and
Is that the
how,
is that the Christian role-playing game?
it is. Its original author passed a few years ago, but he kind of gave over the whole IB to a new guy who has put out new copies of Dragon Raid, a new game of his own called Light Warriors or something like that, and has really been advancing it. So I thought that might be an in, but it was one that didn't make it in. So there's just so many companies. There was a really small press British game called Midgard, was it? Came out in 4 volumes, and I've never quite been able to figure out what it is, and that's one I'd like to know more about. But a lot of these we go looking for the original people so that we can talk to them if there's nothing in the printed print, and can't find them anymore.
What are you
Some of them
thinking of
may be gone.
Bifrost?
Bifrost, that's it. Thank you. So Bifrost, it came out in 4 volumes. Each one's lists a different publisher. It's probably another VD&D-ish game. But, who did this? Why did they do this? I'd like to know, but I'd like to know is why I started writing, which might be an interesting question for you. Why did you two start writing histories?
John, you want to go first and then I'll go?
Sure, I guess so. I mean, to me, it's really a side effect of the archival process that I do, right? I mean, I think the my primary contribution to all of this is actually identifying sources more than anything else. And although I write narrative histories, I think at the end of the day, mostly the purpose of my narrative histories is to kind of explain the archive or explain why this thing is important and why they should have a place in people's future consideration of the history of gaming. Um, so, I mean, for me, it was, yeah, like just a process that as I got interested in, especially the origins of simulation, just of the concept that you might have a statistical model and use implements of chance to try to decide fictional events against it, and just started reading up around that. I think necessarily as you order it in a kind of narrative, or at least I do. And the rating playing with the world is just a side effect of that, a very protracted side effect, one that would generally be counterindicated by your physician if a medication was responsible for it. Ben?
It was a great ending. So I think beyond the incidentals of, I was writing for Geek and Sundry and they were like, do a piece on role-playing game history. Um, I think it answers a deep psychological need. A lot of my life seems to have arranged itself to answer deep psychological needs of mine. Um, and I don't know about you guys, but seventh and eighth grade sucked. It's a terrible time, awful, awful 2 years. Um, and in that time, I was the friendless kid at my middle school. Um, Things were rough at home, and the one of the things I just turned to was AT&T second edition, and I just found myself reading those texts again and again and again. Not even playing. Like I didn't play any AD&D really until high school, but I found some real comfort in those books, and at the same time, they were certainly not valued texts socially or culturally or familially. And as a result, I think as an adult, getting to go back and be like, see, look, this has value. Like there's a story here, there's something going on. I want to justify the ways of tabletop role playing games to others in some way, shape, or form. And in that way, I don't know, just justify my choices when I was 12 years old. Um, I think that's my answer, at least today during this podcast.
More broadly, I was doing much of what John did, which is I was starting to put together an online catalog of games for RPGNet. And as I started to lay out all of these products, and being able to organize them through the database by year and stuff like that, I was like, why did this company stop publishing? What happened to this person? Why did this person jump from this company to this company? And the first one I actually wrote was a history of Imperium Games, who very briefly published Traveler after GDW went down in the mid to late 90s. And there was someone who I'd bought their products and then I lost track of them when I got into the gaming industry, ironically. Um, and I said, "What happened to them?" And the answer was terrible management, but and media control. But that was what got me in, though I always had a love of history back to a beloved history teacher in high school, David Del Porto.
I kind of want to ask about that high school teacher. What
Uh,
was so wonderful about that high school teacher?
he was enthusiastic. He was a classic FDR Democrat when I was young and stupid and thought that conservatism was the way to go. So he challenged me constantly. And he also designed classroom simulations, which were used beyond. We did the Haymarket trial as a classroom simulation, and we did other things that were more simulative. And it got many of us so enthusiastic that we actually put together a mock trial team the next year. And he, of course, said, "Yes, let me be your person sponsoring that." So he went beyond just teaching and really made it an encompassing and often sometimes role-playing experience.
I taught in Egypt from 2002 to 2004, and I was teaching freshman, sophomore, and junior year English literature in the American division of an Egyptian high school. And I think we were reading the World War One war poets, and to make World War One make more sense, I just I went and found the only copy of Risk I could in Egypt, and did a very crude World War One simulation using Risk. I couldn't tell you what I did with it, but about 15 years later, one of the kids that was the biggest pain in my butt from when I was teaching in Egypt found me on Facebook and was like, I still remember World War One because of that simulation. That simulation, 15 years later, I still remember stuff from that, and I was like, that's a powerful tool then, and I feel uh very fulfilled. And it is like, again, I teach now. I teach seventh and eighth grade now, And it's amazing to me how often the kids that were pains in my butts will come back to me and be like, "Hey man, thanks a lot. Things really worked out for me," and that definitely makes me feel pretty good. Um, I'm going to ask, and again, if no one has a question, that's fine. But does anyone else have a question? I'll leave 10 seconds of open air to see if anyone wants to say anything, and if not, I'll say something else.
Yeah, why risk and not diplomacy?
Because I couldn't get diplomacy in Egypt. Now I use diplomacy, which is way more graceful and way better. Um, but especially in 2002, 2003, it was what can you get? And man, it's funny. I went to an underground metal concert when I was in Cairo, but I found no sort of gaming culture um, at all. Um, and even the even the metal concert. I went to it, and of course, because I'm an introvert, I left early. But it was busted up by the cops as a Satanist gathering before it was even over in 2002 in Cairo. So I would like diplomacy so much better for that. Again, that's what I do now with my seventh and eighth graders, and they do fall into diplomacy. Like afterwards, they'll just play the game by themselves. Like some kids started a diplomacy club, but that is the obvious. Yeah, it is the obvious question. Why not use the game best suited for that in that era? And I just didn't bring it with me. I should have, but there we go.
Hard to score in that part of the world at that era, I imagine.
It's amazing how much the world has opened up in the last 20 years and made that stop
Pyro
more
so
available.
much.
Maybe not.
So I'll ask you guys this question. So, an obnoxious, grabby question. Uh, so Wizards of the Coast is looking for somebody to be in charge of D&D. Who would you hire to be in that position?
No takers. What a shocker. No takers. I mean, given that, I still occasionally do some work with the franchise, it's probably not something I can speak to.
You don't want to be pissing on a possible future boss.
I mean,
Shannon,
yeah, it's more just that I think given the state of where the company is now, I think anybody understands they have challenges. And
Mhm.
like, I just what what would even be a satisfactory answer to that question? I mean, I think the answer to that question would have to be what it really is the fate of D&D going forward. And like, it would not surprise me at all if the fate of D&D going forward was largely digital, was largely AI based. Wouldn't shock me. And
No.
like, what does that require? Requires tech people and, that's something that's been tried before. We'll see if it works. I don't know. Or they could go a completely different direction on this.
I mean, I was pretty shocked that Project Sigil ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Uh, I thought that, okay, executives must be fully on board with this, and they must like they see this as the digital future, and here we go. And I as a like it looked cool. I as a person was kind of like, is there really a market for this? Um,
I
but
think we've
go ahead.
seen I think we've seen pretty clearly that either Hasbro or Wizards under Hasbro, one or the other, is very short-sighted. That they're always looking for their profits a year or two ahead. And I mean, we all have seen the decisions they've made since Hasbro purchased Wizards of the Coast in 1999, and there are a lot of very short-sighted decisions. From trying to kick out the OGL to have a temporary spike in profits to laying off all of their best designers every Christmas. So Sigil going away was absolutely no surprise to me. It was Gleemax. It was every other uh, long-term plan they've made that they scrapped.
Who's
So
doing
go ahead,
Gleemax
please
history, by
go
the
ahead,
way?
John.
I was gonna say who here is gonna write the Gleemax history, by the way?
I've started it. Um, I interviewed some people, and ironically, I've also been interviewing the recently deceased from Project Sigil, and it does jump out at me at how similar both stories are in that uh, Hasbro WotC wants to translate Dungeons and Dragons into it. I guess I should tell everyone. Gleemax uh, was an attempt with fourth edition to break Dungeons and Dragons into the digital realm. I want to say that there were three parts to Gleemax. They wanted there to be a social media element. They wanted it to be a digital games platform where you could purchase digital games and play it then in Gleemax, and also be essentially a virtual tabletop. And they wanted it to do all three. They invested money in it, but Wizards of the Coast is a not a technology company. Again, John would know better than me if it is now, but it from what I hear from people, it does not seem to be a company that you would call a technology company. Um, so back then, the ambition and scale of what they were attempting was not in sync with the number of people they hired, or apparently what they paid them. They did not apparently get the best people to work on Gleemax, and therefore at one point they were like, okay, we've invested tens of millions of dollars, we got nothing, we're going to end it. And in talking to I've talked to two Project Sigil people so far. I've got another interview for tomorrow night. And if either of you know Chris Kao, I'd love to talk to him. Um, but it sounds pretty similar so far, where they were like, we want to translate D&D into a digital space. We're going to make a virtual tabletop. Um, but the idea of the amount of work required to make that happen was again not commensurate with budget or staffing. I talked to the sole VFX artist working on Project Sigil last week, and he worked for Wizards of the Coast for 2.5 years. He spent all 2.5 years doing nothing but doing visual effects for spells that will be included in Project Sigil. Anybody want to guess how many spells he got done in his entire time working on the project?
58.
Oh, they're 22.
40 apparently. He got 40 spells done in his entire career at Wizards of the Coast. And again, they were apparently prioritizing based on, okay, if we do a fire effect, how many other spells can we use that fire effect in, which is a logical way to do things. Um, I have heard all the Project Sigil people do speak very highly of their coworkers. They're kind of like, we were a great team. We would a thing I also heard was we just needed 6 more months. If they'd launched it in 6 more months, it would have been so much cleaner, so much better. Uh, One person said that he was really surprised by that rollout in February. He thought it was going to be like a beta testing thing where people are invited, and then suddenly it's in front of the whole world with no marketing. Apparently, that was the sign to the team that, hey, the ship is sinking. You're not going to be here long. Um, but I would agree with you that, like, I think it's obvious that there needs to be some sort of digital translation of D&D. I shouldn't say needs to. Uh, there's so many great digital tools, it seems odd not to use them. Um, I don't know what that looks like. Because again, I play like a troglodyte, right? Like I'm around the table with paper and pencils and I'm throwing dice on actual dead wood. Um,
Sure. But I mean, all of us, I mean, we understand that the things that on the shelves behind us, those books, they don't go away when Wizards of the Coast or any other publisher changes direction with their product. We can utilize them non-consensually if we were so inclined to. But like, I mean, I just don't think there's any other sane way for the stated objectives of the company to be accomplished other than becoming far more technology focused. And, if they change their objectives, which we might think is a very rational thing to do, and went closer back to their roots, then sure, they should do something completely different. But for their stated objectives, there's like no way to do this other than having a real technology makeover in the company.
I don't know about you guys, but maybe I said this to you in individual conversations. I don't recall, but again, I am constantly hearing rumors of they're going to sell D&D, they're going to sell D&D, they're going to sell D&D to somebody else. Um, and I never never run with it because I can never get any good sourcing on it, and it's such a persistent rumor that because this is just wish fulfillment is that the fans would like it if someone else was in charge. Maybe it is, unless you guys are hearing things that I'm not.
I think there's zero chance of that. Hasbro does not let their IPs go. I think the best you might ever see would be they could spin off a company with Wizards of the Coast or D&D, and that might have different implications at that point, but sell it? No way, sadly.
I guess I'd also say, in some cases, better the devil you know. You know, who would be in line with the pocketbook to acquire it, and what would they do with it if they did? Sometimes
Hmm.
better the devil you know.
Yeah, I think the answer would be no one good would have that type of money.
Yeah, I mean, the names I've heard have not set my heart aflutter. Um, one rumor was Tencent, which is that Chinese company that owns part of Larian. Another one was Asmodee, if I'm even saying that right. Um, and I guess there could be worse companies than Asmodee, but I don't know. It depends on your opinion of them. Um, so Shannon, I will ask you the hard question again. Is there anyone you would want to put in front of D&D, in charge of D&D?
Uh, I wouldn't have a specific name, but I would go, counter. I would say someone I would like to see in charge of D&D would be someone who would prioritize and love the tabletop experience and um, recognize AI in particular as the um, phantasm it is. So do I think that's going to happen? No, but you know, there's any number of great designers in the tabletop industry who have a great love for tabletop play who would be great there.
Did I ask you about AI the last time we talked, Shannon?
I don't think so. I
So,
don't remember
t
getting very angry.
tell me about the phantasm of AI.
Well, even if we step away from the fact that it's built upon the plagiarism of everyone's creative work, the thing is, it's definitely artificial, but it's not intelligence. It's, fancy dancy pattern matching that, puts together a whole bunch of words in ways that it's been taught they fit together. And so it's entirely context free. And certainly you can guide it to, try and provide that context very carefully, section by section, sentence by sentence, page by page, but it doesn't know what it's doing. I mean, there's no, but there's nothing intelligent there. And so if you don't put anything intelligent in, you're not going to get anything intelligent out. And I mean, that doesn't even speak to my most fundamental issue with it, even going beyond the widespread plagiarism, which is just, and other people have said this better than me, you know, I want, robots and computers and artificial intelligence to do the back-breaking work that I don't care about, not the creative work I do. It's the exact opposite direction technology should be going.
I mean, my own view about AI is a little different just because I think the generative AI component of it is probably the least applicable to tabletop
Yeah.
role-playing games, actually. And the things that really entrance me about the potential for AI for something like this is not for it to supplant player creativity, be that like through words or through visualizations, but its ability to listen and to be able to parse and understand what people say. And, the ability to take, a play transcript, that just have a machine listen to us. And at the end, just be able to tell us exactly how many goblins did Shannon kill? Well, Shannon killed 8 goblins. How much treasure did you accumulate? Well, you got exactly 13 gold pieces, 11 silver pieces, and 1 copper piece. And like even just having the ability to do things like that, which are based on precisely this technology. The same training is required to do the speech rack, to do the diarization, all the components that you need to do that. It's a hard problem. There's actually a paper that came out earlier this year from someone who was looking specifically at the natural language processing problem of this and declared that tabletop role-playing games are a hard problem in the space. I'd like to see more research on that. So I think there's actually really useful things to be able to do without even getting into the generative or plagiarism part of it. Just in terms of being able to facilitate our interaction with a system that we don't use terribly well, Like in my experience, in the sense of D&D has always been a game of crude approximation, and role-playing games kind of have allowed all of that crudeness into pretty much every simulation we run in the tabletop. And I would never want to do away with it, but it would just be great if something could tell me that like the bless that was cast 3 rounds ago is about to expire. Like if I'm a DM, right? And it just tells me that because it's been listening and it understands that's what's happening, and I just see that on the screen. I could ignore it if I feel like it. Like it's not in charge. I just want it to listen and tell me what the hell's going on. Maybe I just keep less state than other people do when they are DMing or playing. But man, I think having like a co-pilot for that would be super useful. And I think that's a tool I'd pay for. And I don't think it's a tool that takes money away from any creator. But like, were D&D to go in a direction like that with the technology, and you can probably tell from how rehearsed my pitch of this is, it's not like I haven't been screaming about this from the top of my lungs for some time now, including the people who work there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my knee-jerk reaction to AI is because generative AI is what's out there. That sounds like a great use case. Um, some of the people I work with use Zoom's AI, which provides transcripts. Those are fine, or not transcripts, summaries. And those are all good uses. And there's good uses in research too. It's the generative and you know, the theft of creative ability. Those are what get me. But yeah, Copilot sounds pretty neat.
Any tool can be used for good or for ill, right? And yeah, I think unfortunately people gravitate to the ill part of this one pretty quick because it lets you maybe make a quick buck. John Oliver did a great thing this week. I don't know if you saw it on Slop, um, where he really went into the monetization of AI slop and like how it is that works. I hadn't really been aware of. And the
Huh.
degree to which you can, I mean, the reason people just mass manufacture this slop is because people are profiting from it. Um, but yeah, for all that evil, I still think the technology is transformative, and I would be astonished if future historians, the historians of the 2030s and 2040s, looking back at this decade, if what they see is the most transformative thing about role-playing games in this decade doesn't turn out to be AI. I'd be shocked.
I mean, over here in education, we are there's an AI wave heading towards us. Um, you know, before AI, if a kid turned in something that was plagiarized, I could catch it. Like maybe I might not catch them the first time they plagiarized, but after two or three times, I'm like, okay, that's not you. Like, I read your work every week. You're in seventh grade. You just wouldn't use that vocabulary. And I can take their work, put it in Google, and it'll almost always find me where they got it from. And I'm like, busted. And AI, like pretty rapidly, that became untenable. Um, Especially since you can now say to ChatGPT, hey, make it sound like a seventh grader wrote this. And it's okay. Like, it's not something where I'm going to be like, wow, this is an amazing piece of work, but it is something that gets that kid through that week without having to do any work. Um, and then, on the other side of things, I'm just constantly bombarded with, would you like AI to help you with your grading? Use these AI tools to help you grade things and paper. And I'm like, what are we doing here now? Like, AI's writing the papers, AI's grading the papers. Why don't we all just go home early? It really has been a fundamental challenge. Um, our school is hiring somebody to try and put together an artificial intelligence for the school. Don't ask me any details on that because that's all I know, and the rest is far above my pay grade. But it certainly does seem transformative, and like I don't know that I'd have a problem with an AI dungeon master, like or some sort again like a co-pilot where like I ran the One Ring for a year. And it was really convenient to have ChatGPT to be like, hey, ChatGPT, can you write me a Tolkien-esque 20 line poem about this river that everybody's crossing? It's like, sure, here you go. And I read it at the table, and everyone's just kind of like, oh, that must be just something from the Tolkien Legendarium that I'm unfamiliar with. And they just kind of roll with it. Um, and it was great for things like that. So I can certainly see its applications. And I guess I'm either an optimist or a pessimist in that I do think it's going to fundamentally change anything in a shockingly short period of time. And Valhalla or hell is around the corner. Your choice.
Yeah, more broadly in society, I totally agree with that. Um, I mean, I think that the stakes are quite high around this at the moment, and like that the next couple of years are going to be decisive. Um, and it could be really scary, and it'll be a mixed bag, I'm sure, is what it'll be.
I think there's also a possibility that the whole technology is going to crash because it's very expensive and they are not figuring out how to get their money back yet. And so there's a lot of highly leveraged companies that have lots of investors pouring money into them, expecting really high returns, which we haven't seen yet. That might just be my hopefulness. Sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Uh, I feel like I have a follow-up to that. So you're speculating about essentially an AI crash, right? This proves to be like what was it? Cold fusion in the 80s? Like, cold fusion is going to change the world, and it just never has, right? So you're saying that ChatGPT is going to be, or not ChatGPT, AI is going to be something like that, where we thought it was going to transform the world, but it just helps kids cheat.
Oh, well, that's certainly the issue. But just more broadly, it's very expensive. It's costing a lot of energy. There's a lot of server farms being created. There's, power plants that are being taken over for it. Is there actually a sufficient value that it's creating to pay for that? And, lots of investors and companies say yes, but in the next couple of years, we're going to know if that's the case or not, or if it becomes something that is only used for very expensive use cases, research, who knows what else.
So a couple years ago, I was like, I think a fundamental driver of growth in the tabletop role-playing game industry has been broken. Like about a year after the OGL, I'm like, instead of everything driving people towards 5e and having this growth, suddenly we have this splintering, and it seems like when that happens, that there's a stagnation in the industry, maybe even a shrinking. It's like things that happened in the 90s, and about 2 years on past that, I'm like, I think I was wrong. I think that the industry might just be so big now that the fracturing doesn't matter in some way. Um, and that people are still finding D&D and then just moving past it. And uh, like one of the things that I was like, well, what's going to happen to game conventions? Like, if I'm right and there's some sort of problem, uh, in the growth of the tabletop role-playing game industry, you should see it in attendance at conventions. And attendance at conventions just keeps going up and up and up and up. Origins was up 18% this year. Um, so now that we've discussed how I'm wrong, let me ask you guys. So do you think that the tabletop role-playing game industry will just continue to climb for the next few years still?
Well, I'll jump in and say I don't feel like the tabletop industry has literally ever been fractured. I mean, what percentage of the industry is D&D in sales and play? 85, 90, 75?
It's an interesting question. It would depend on how much you think D&D is making. Like
Yeah.
Ryan Dancy was on here a few days ago, and he's like, he keeps saying that he thinks D&D is a $20 million a year business. Greg Tito told me that in 2014, D&D grossed, 2015 it might have been, grossed 25 million, and that it was 125 million in 2020, 2021, something like that. And that it had this huge exponential growth in the backhand of the teens. I would have to go and look at ICV2 and look at their report on the size of the role-playing game industry. Anybody recall those numbers off the top of their head or no? But either way, I
Mm,
certainly agree with you. It's obviously the biggest fish in the pond.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so,
I
certainly
mean,
it being 80% or above of the industry, I think was true in 1990, and like is probably, yeah, in 2021, I think was surely true. I don't know if it's true the second. Um, and it may be, I know I've heard lots of speculation about this online about what the actual figure is, but the part of the problem too is that I think the actual income of a company like well, the D&D group within Wizards, within Hasbro, is difficult to tabulate because it has so many like externalities. Like, you have a license with a video game that sold a lot or that had a big advance that came with it. You have feature films that come out. Like there's like all these like things that can really move the needle very dramatically from like year to year. Especially if your income is within the ranges that Greg Tito was talking about, like things like a feature film that you have some stake in make a big difference. And so I think if I had to guess, it may be yo-yoing a bit around this time. And
Mhm.
but I hear there's going to be another one of these D&D movies, right? A sequel to Honor Among Thieves, or at least that seems to be going around. And certainly, I don't know if there's going to ever be a game in the near future near as popular as BG3 was, or as well received as BG3 was. But like if there were, that would be another thing that would kind of remake the whole board of who's ahead and how much of the industry it really is. If it comes to like actual physical book sales, though, I'm sure that tells a very different story, especially in the era of D&D Beyond, where like so many of the sales now come from that, which is just you're selling bits. Um, in terms, I'd be really interested to see somebody try to extract out what the paper book sales of the TTRPG industry overall are like now, and what percentage of that is just D&D. I suspect it's much less.
But to step back to your question of growth, um, it feels to me like the big podcasting and streaming growth has plateaued or even dropped. Just like looking at the YouTube numbers, it looks like they might have Critical Role in particular is what I've been looking at recently. It looks like campaign one or two were their high point, and campaign three hasn't been as high. And I certainly think that was one of the main drivers of growth in the tens. Um, so that might suggest not as much growth, but that's what I'd look at because it seems to me like that was really what was bringing people in.
Daggerheart is coming in hot. I was actually looking at
Yeah.
the Gen Con events. And I couldn't scroll through enough pages to cover the number of Daggerheart events there are at Gen Con.
I
Wow.
think that's going to be a big question in the
My
next six
fingers gave
months.
up.
Yeah, how well they do with Daggerheart and whether they're going to use it for campaign four. Because if they actually use it for campaign four, then it becomes a serious threat to D&D. Maybe.
And
Oh, now
not so
Chris and Jeremy are there, right? Oh, that's very interesting, isn't it?
and Ivan Norman out.
Yep.
So Shannon, what you're saying is maybe I'm right after all.
You might be. I,
The internet says I'm wrong, Shannon.
I don't know why we have historians on here and we're trying to,
talk about
prognosticate
the modern.
rather than talk
Yeah.
about the past. But,
Let's talk about the past then.
let's talk about historical methodology. So, do you believe that there are covering laws in history that allow us to make predictions about the future, like, Marxist historical materialism? Yes, no? I
Yeah,
say,
you can go ahead and say no,
To a
John.
limited extent. I mean, when I was writing the original Designers and Dragons back in 2012 or something, it was really looking to me like there was a boom and bust every decade or so. Um, we had this black and white comic bust in the 80s, which impacted some publishers. I know it impacted Chaosium badly, and I suspect it impacted others. Then we had the CCG bust in the in the 90s, and then we had the D20 boom and bust in the odd odds. And so when I was writing in 2011, 2012, I was like, we must have the next bust around the corner from looking at these past things. And D&D 4E fizzled out, and that certainly hurt the industry. But it didn't seem like we've had a bust like the D20 bust or the CCG bust since D20.
So John, you were gonna go say the exact opposite of me, I think. So go ahead, do it.
no, 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 no. I mean, so I think I'm gonna say that I don't think we're able to make predictions based on the past. I mean, that's my whole point about covering laws, right? Is just that, because when I was doing Playing at the World in 2012, right? Like when that came out, I thought I was writing an epitaph, right? I mean,
Mm.
who would have thought we would see anything like what we saw in the 2010s from the RPG industry, especially direct tabletop. And it's not like I was making some prediction about it, but I was just treating this like something I needed to justify by talking about the influence it had had on like World of Warcraft for people to understand why it was even relevant to talk about the history of simulation or the history of experience and levels and hit points and things like that. And so, I don't know what crystal ball we're supposed to have from looking at all this that will enable us to see the future. For me, again, it's much more looking at what the situation is on the ground moment to moment. And like I said, things like AI, I mean, they're just it's inescapable. It is part of every, component of cultural discourse that you can possibly encounter at the moment. And like its pervasiveness alone makes me think that, it's going to play a part for good or ill, like Gollum, right? In what the fate of this is going to be going forward.
What is the fate of this going to be going forward?
Hmm.
You know, my Monday night game is finishing up a Numenera campaign, and I'm going to take over running, and we cannot decide what to do next. There's only five of us, so you'd think that we could come to a consensus. But it seems so far to be impossible. There's uh, one person wants to do Urban Shadows, one person wants to do Ars Magica, one person wants to do Call of Cthulhu, and when we sit down to talk about it, what is most strange to me is no one talks. Like we've been playing together for like 10 years, and it is as though we've become paralyzed in choosing this next new game. I'm like, is this a social value thing? Is it that we all value these friendships so much that none of us wants to come out and be like, well, I really want Call of Cthulhu, and there's no way I'm playing Urban Shadows again. But it's a very strange thing, and that I've now stumbled into. I don't remember why I started talking about this.
Your answer, by the way, is to play Ars Magica. But
I've
That would be
never.
my call too.
I will show this to them, and maybe this will move us towards consensus. Because I've never run it. And again, everyone I talk to is like, it's amazing. You have to run it. I backed the recent crowdfunding campaign, so I have access to an awful lot of PDFs. So maybe I can persuade them. I'll send this over. We'll see what they say.
I think I've played in 4 or 5 Ars Magica campaigns. And the most joyous ones were the ones where we used the troop style role playing that they were pushing harder in second or third edition. And that's where everyone GMs and you trade off. And it just created these great collaborative campaigns. But like I said earlier, one of the only kind of role playing adjacent thing I'm doing right now is Microscope. So I'm a big fan of collaborative creation.
and yeah, just the whole concept too of the custos and all the different kinds of compartmentalized roles that you get in Ars Magica that you can shift between. It is an intriguing role-playing experience. I think one of the great designs of like when you look at things that really move the ball forward, so much of what came we understand as the storyteller system and so on in the 1990s just fell directly out of that work at Lion Rampant back in the day.
Do you guys have a favorite edition of Ars Magica?
I mean, I would play Lion Rampant, but I mean, I probably easier to get the later ones and work from those.
Yeah, I think the second edition was where I had my first great games. And one of the great things about it was this tight little, I want to say 144 page book, but it might have been longer, but it was a very short book. And it just had so much in that. There's really something to be said for brevity in role-playing games. The third edition, which was the first one put out by White Wolf themselves, was very attractive, but every copy of it I have, if I still have copies, fell apart because they tried to bind color pages in and glossy color pages and didn't really know how to do it at the time.
That purple spine second, I think you're right. That would be the one to the go-to
Yeah.
if
Okay,
you can get it.
I will dutifully hunt down a PDF. So what can people purchase that will send royalties into your pocket, or what would you want to see people pick up after having listening to us talk for an hour?
I don't know. I see you have a copy of the Dreams in Gary's Basement behind you there. I think I talk in that a lot. I'd like to support Pat, who made it. Um, So you can go, I think it's rpghistory.net that is his website for that. You can go watch that.
Why haven't I had Pat Kilbane on this podcast? Pat
Good question.
Kilbane.
Pat is a great guy. He's much funnier than I am. We definitely have him on. He's amazing.
Okay, so Jon Peterson says go buy The Dreams in Gary's Basement. I'm gonna say go buy Game Wizards because I think it's my favorite book of yours. But it's that is
Well,
a
it's the
busy
drama
list.
one. You like the drama.
What do you mean?
It's
That's
not
fair.
system design history. Why don't people like my system design history? I actually want to do. Anyway,
That's funny.
Game Wizards is my favorite of John's too. And if we're gonna say go buy a great pair of books, it would be Game Wizards and Slaying the Dragon, which just go together like bookends.
Well, thank you so much. I still can't get over, and again, John, you've heard me say this 1,000 times, the remarkable convenience of your book coming out in October of 2021, and then mine coming out in the summer of 2022. And you're right that like John stops and I pick up. Like it's you know uh remarkable really. And I'm kind of jealous of the people that had the aesthetic experience of reading your work and then mine and kind of getting this complete epic, which
I
I think
did
is
that.
very cool.
I read
Bless
them
you,
back to
Shannon.
back.
Oh. And so Shannon, what should people pick up of yours?
My current baby is This is Free Trader Beowulf, my History of Traveler, which is over my right shoulder. It's um the only full history book I've read in the last 10 years or so, and so it feels like a much more mature, more developed and better written book than what I was doing a decade ago, just from, another million words of experience of writing between one and the other. Um, it's going to be a Kickstarter maybe this year, maybe next for Designers and Dragons Origins, which are 4 books of product histories on D&D covering AD&D 1E, basic Dungeons and Dragons and OD&D. So I'd say keep an eye out for that whenever it happens. But Evil Hat, who's going to be publishing it, has a really full schedule, and I'm still doing the really last set of edits on it for them. So
So I will mention that I have something exciting coming up on the podcast, which is on July 15th. We're doing a book club uh, for Shoah from Wraith the Oblivion, which is, of course, about the Holocaust book from Wraith the Oblivion. I'm going to have the book's developer, Richard Dansky, on to talk about it, as well as Lou Prosperi of Earth Dawn fame. Patreon subscribers get to join that conversation live on July 15th, and we will have a Q&A segment for Patreon subscribers. And our Patreon is a mere $3 a month and gets you amazing and fun things like live access to that book club. We also have Patreon-only episodes. You can see me interviewing second edition designer Zeb Cook in Hugh Hefner's bedroom at GaryCon. Tons of fun. Only $3 a month. So, hey, if you have not done so, please become a Patreon subscriber. So, John, Shannon, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come on here and talk. Anything else you want to shout out or say?
thanks for
that's
having
it.
us.
Yeah,
We should do
definitely.
this more often. Maybe we should talk about history one of these times we come on. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
Hey, we
but
can.
but I agree. More often, have John and me on, and we'll talk history.
Okay, I will gladly have you on more often to talk history. That sounds delightful. All right, so you guys have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Bye-bye.